All right, so these legends are usually based upon hardcore fact. Now, our ancestral memory of the golden era, if we were to credit the collective testimony of all ancient races, man's early history was truly an incredible history. It was a golden age of advanced civilization, of original giants who had superior intelligence and technology. This appears to have been a universal truth known to everyone in ancient times. Sacred records affirm that at the very beginning, soon after the fall from paradise, men possessed extraordinary mental abilities. Beginning with the raw earth, they mastered a high level of civilization and technology in just the first 6 generations of their existence. In that short time, they were able to build cities, play complex musical instruments, and smelt metals. Indeed, with their scientific complexities, these earliest men, it seems, were no fools. We might well wonder to what degree they further developed and refined this technology. In the final few centuries before the flood struck, were the miracles of science as common as they are now? A perfectly valid question, I would think. Now imagine, if you can, paved rainbow cities whose houses of crystal reflected every special hue, and we're talking about air travel, computers, and plastics. Now, did you know that when Alexander Graham Bell gave us the telephone, he said that it had been done before? The old devices have been reinvented, he observed. Yes, you read it right. That's exactly what Bell said. He said, in fact, the question was pressed further by the eminent British scientist Frederick Soddy. He's a winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics, and he wondered whether the ancients might not only have attained our present knowledge, but a power hitherto unmastered by us at this time. Now, there are physical remains also. So, in our quest here for the truth concerning ancient civilizations, we've got to have some physical evidence. As a jurist or a lawyer, if we went into court and we wanted to prove our theory or prove our side of the case, we'd have to have some kind of evidence. We call them exhibits, physical evidence. Now, where did Bell and Soddy get their information? Well, quite possibly from some rusty old records. Nevertheless, our quest is not based on ancient text and reports, but on accepted scientific discoveries. There are recently discovered artifacts that cannot be dismissed, namely objects of metal sitting in museums today that are unquestionably made in the ancient world that would have required very advanced technology to produce, a technology not to be repeated until our day today. The weight of evidence grows daily, evidence that all of the major secrets of modern technology were known and then forgotten long ago, evidence that early man did create a society that surpassed ours in all aspects of development. The entire world is really a dead man's tomb. It's a treasure hunter's paradise. As we prize or we open the coffin, suspense builds. And slowly we are lifting the lid on a lost technology which almost smacks of science fiction. We come face to face with such absurdities as brain transplants, colonies on Mars, and invisible men. And then we wonder, what's next? Well, admittedly, such concepts almost strain credibility, and we're tempted to ask, could the ancients have really advanced so far? It may help to consider our own age. As recently as 100 years ago, were not most of today's inventions totally unknown, even unbelievable? Since then, the spawning has been very sudden and very rapid. And what's more, the present age of basic discoveries is hardly at its end. It is forecast that just 15 years in the future, the accumulated knowledge that we have today will double in just 15 years. Now, can you grasp what that means? How then can one possibly conceive of the state of knowledge attained by the antediluvians before the deluge struck? Let me ask you this question. Think about this for a second. In the Bible, it tells us that they were artificers in brass and iron in Genesis chapter 4. An artificer in brass and iron. Let's go back to Columbus. Now, we look back 500 years and we say, well, that's the Middle Ages, and technology wasn't as advanced as it is today, but we had ships. And we had metallurgy, we had swords, and they had some cannons, they had guns, they knew about gunpowder. Well, in Columbus's day, in 1500, they were still casting cannon in sand. A turret lathe had not been invented yet. Metalworking tools, such as lathes, were yet to be discovered in the future. Now, if we were casting cannon in sand 500 years ago, and within 500 years we're putting men on the moon, if in Genesis 4 they already had advanced metallurgy, that is, the mixing of metals together, which is advanced beyond casting cannon in sand, couldn't they do the same thing in 500 years? Now, the amount of time from Adam and Eve until the flood was 1,656 years. So if in the first 1,100 years, they were able to reach metallurgy, then they had 556 years left with which to duplicate the technology that we have today. Now, there's an obscure scripture here in the Bible. I thought I'd point this one out. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 30, that anticipates space travel. I looked at this some years back, and I kind of marveled, and I said, why would God even put such a thing in there unless he was already familiar with? In verse 4 it says, if any of yours be driven out unto the outmost parts of heaven, from thence will the Lord your God gather you, and from thence shall he fetch you. How far out into the heavens has man traveled that he has been lost on other planets or on other moons, like, say, our moon or Mars? I don't know. It never entered our vocabulary until the last 50 years. It's been in my lifetime. You know, when I was a kid, we used to read the comics, and there was a guy by the name of Flash Gordon. That was science fiction. That was in the 1950s. Nobody ever thought that anybody was going to travel to the moon, or build a space station, or put satellites up in the air with which we could bounce radio waves off of and telephone calls. Never occurred to anybody. We had Dick Tracy with a watch, you know, a two-way communication watch. Today we all have cell phones. Dick Tracy, science fiction, 1950. He's got a two-way wrist radio. Today everybody's got a cell phone talking with people anywhere in the world. Now, we did that in the last 50 years or so. And notice that the technology that we have here today, in the world today, just take a look around you, computers, automobiles, airplanes, jet airplanes. We didn't have that 100 years ago. Go back 200 years. Look what has been accomplished over the past 200 years, and ask yourself, if these people were already advanced in metallurgy prior to, this is BC, this is way before the flood, for crying out loud. This is before Noah's Ark. Now, I know, you go to the movies and you look at the movie, Noah's Ark, or you look at the movies that are produced by Cecil B. DeMille, in Egyptian times, and we say, hey, these people are barbarians. They're ancient. They don't have technology. They're building pyramids that we can't duplicate today. They're building buildings and monuments that we don't have a technology to do. But they're dragging their knuckles on the ground and hitting their women over the head and dragging them off. That's preposterous poppycock. It's insane. Doesn't add up with the physical evidence. I mean, that pyramid is sitting there, boys and girls, like it or lump it. It's there. We can't build one today. We don't have the money. There isn't anybody in the world, including the United States of America, that's got the money to duplicate that Great Pyramid. Technologically, we could do it today, but it wasn't until 1964 that we were able to do it. Now, those people back in those days, they built that thing. And here's the Bible talking about space travel here in Deuteronomy 30, verse 4. And I'm sitting there saying, if we can come to space travel, if we can come to jet engine flight in 100 years, from 1900 to 2000, this isn't too much of a stretch of my imagination to see somebody doing this prior to the flood. And do we have any physical evidence of it? Oh, you betcha we do. Physical evidence abounds, not 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, but by the hundreds. By the hundreds. For instance, he's got some sections in here. I'm going to flip over here to, I guess, number 16. Let me get to chapter 16 here. And the one that as a contractor, the one that I was really surprised to see, there are 64 examples of construction techniques that have not been duplicated until the 20th century. That's not the buildings themselves. That's the techniques, like concrete. We think of cement today, building the Empire State Building with steel and concrete, as being something new and modern that we just came up with in the last 100 years. You go back here 200 years, you didn't see any Empire State Buildings. Now, that's a modern technology. There's some buildings that have been built out here in the hinterlands, and there's microscopes Did you know that in Moses' time they had microscopes? I was absolutely amazed. Glasswork and microscopes. I'm going to give you some examples. 24 examples of glasswork and microscopes sit in the museums today, not on display. They sit down in the basements, hidden away so that you can't see them. Like the skeleton of the 14-foot giant up in Chicago. They're not on display. They exist. They were found. They've been recorded. We have the pictures of it. We know that they're there. But they don't fit the theory of evolution. And anything that doesn't fit with evolution is not put on display. Nobody has an explanation for it. Well, there's an explanation. When you see something like a 200,000-ton block of rock that is set in position, somebody had the technology to make it, pick it up, move it, and set it into place. We can't do that today. And since we can't explain that, and our fairy tale dream world says that we're evolving better and better, smarter and smarter,